The lights from the chandelier shimmered above, reflecting off the golden balloons and polished glasses. But I felt a knot in my stomach, as if the whole room were holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to unfold. I am Bernadine Lewis, 69 years old, a widow, a mother, and a grandmother. And yet, in that moment, at my granddaughter's birthday party, I felt like a helpless child, cornered by shadows. The laughter around me rang hollow. The sweet smell of frosting clung too tightly to the air, and every smile from my son, Calvin, and his wife, Monique, seemed too sharp, too rehearsed. I tried to shake it off, to focus on Zoe, the bright-eyed 15-year-old, who had begged me to come tonight. But when she tugged on my sleeve and whispered in my ear, the world around me froze. "Grandma," she breathed, her voice trembling, "tonight, my parents are going to take away your fortune." Her words didn't register at first, like a foreign language spoken too quickly. My fortune? What fortune? All I had was this house that had been in my family for 3 generations, the savings from years of teaching, and the modest pension left after my husband passed. But the look in Zoe's eyes, wide, wet, terrified, made me realize she wasn't making up a childish fantasy. She had heard something real, something dark. My hand trembled as I reached for the table, steadying myself. The room still hummed with laughter, but inside me, everything collapsed into silence. A cold sweat trickled down my back, and I felt the echo of my husband's voice, a memory from his final days. "Bernadine, promise me you'll never let anyone trick you into signing something you don't understand. The law can be a weapon or a shield, depending on whose hands hold it." At the time, I had brushed it off as the rambling of a man fading away. But now, with Zoe's words clanging like a siren in my ears, I understood the warning. My eyes darted toward Calvin, standing at the head of the table, raising his glass in a toast. His smile was wide, but his eyes were hollow, like a man wearing a mask that no longer fit. Beside him, Monique clung to his arm, her nails painted crimson, her lips curled into a practiced grin that never touched her eyes. They looked like a power couple from a glossy magazine. But I knew beneath that veneer lay desperation, greed, and something far more dangerous. Zoe squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea not to react, not to give them away. My pulse thudded so loudly I could hardly hear Calvin's toast. I stared at the candles flickering on Zoe's cake, at the hopeful faces of family friends clapping along, and I thought, is this really happening to me? Is my own flesh and blood plotting to strip me of everything I built, everything I sacrificed for? The memory of all the nights I had worked double shifts as a teacher's aide, of the times I had pawned my jewelry to pay Calvin's college tuition, of the second mortgage I had taken out to save him from debt collectors, it all came flooding back, crashing into me with a brutal clarity. And now, tonight, he planned to repay me by erasing me, by taking my independence, my home, my dignity, and calling it love. Betrayal is not a clean wound. It is jagged, raw, tearing through flesh and bone until you no longer recognize the person you thought you loved. As I sat in that chair, surrounded by streamers and laughter, I realized the greatest threat to my life wasn't age, illness, or the passage of time. It was my own son, standing just feet away, plotting my downfall under the guise of family. My breath caught in my throat, and for the first time in decades, I felt afraid, not of dying, but of losing myself. The fortune Zoe spoke of was not just money. It was everything I had left of my husband, the legacy meant for her and her future, the security that my sacrifices had earned. And tonight, unless I did something, it would be stolen before my very eyes. I forced a smile as Zoe blew out her candles, hiding the storm raging inside me. But my mind sharpened with a single truth. If Calvin and Monique thought they could outwit me, they had forgotten who I was. I had survived poverty, grief, and a lifetime of struggle. I had raised a son on my own and buried a husband with dignity. If they wanted war, I would give them war. The betrayal stung, but beneath the pain, a fire sparked to life. I leaned down, kissed Zoe on the cheek, and whispered back, "Thank you for telling me, baby. Tonight, they may try, but they will not win." And, as the applause died down and Calvin's eyes locked on mine, I knew the battle for my fortune and my freedom had already begun. That morning had started like any other, the kind of ordinary day that hides disaster in its shadows. I woke early, my bones stiff from the autumn chill, and pulled out the recipe for Zoe's favorite apple pie. The smell of cinnamon and butter soon filled the kitchen, wrapping me in a comfort I had always associated with family. I hummed softly, almost convincing myself that this day would be like every birthday, before smiles, songs, gifts, and nothing more. But even as I sliced the apples, I felt a weight pressing at the edges of my thoughts, something heavy and unspoken. I tried to push it aside, focusing instead on choosing the perfect wrapping paper for the necklace I had saved up to buy Zoe. It wasn't extravagant, just a delicate silver chain with her initials, but I wanted her to know she was seen, valued, cherished. Around 9, my phone buzzed. Calvin's name lit up the screen. I hesitated before answering, the way one does when expecting both affection and disappointment in the same breath. His voice came through syrupy, sweet, smoother than I had heard in years. "Hey, Ma," he said. "Don't worry about bringing anything tonight, okay? We've got it all covered. Just bring yourself and that smile of yours." The way he lingered on the word smile made my stomach twist. Calvin had never cared whether I smiled or frowned before. Not really. I muttered a polite agreement, trying not to let my suspicion leak into my tone. Minutes later, another buzz. This time, a text from Monique. "Bernadine, we insist you relax. You've done enough for us all these years. Tonight is about celebration. Please don't stress yourself. Just come and look beautiful." I stared at the words cold, spreading through me. Monique had never once cared if I looked beautiful. She was the kind of woman who measured worth in bank accounts and designer labels, not in the tired grace of a 69-year-old widow. I deleted the message, but couldn't erase the unease it left behind. I tried to carry on. I set the pie on the counter, tied a ribbon around Zoe's gift, and laid out my Sunday dress, the one my husband had always loved, deep plum with pearl buttons. As I fastened the last button, I caught my reflection in the mirror, lined face, tired eyes, but still standing still here. I whispered to myself, "Tonight is for Zoe. That's all." By afternoon, I walked to the florist and bought a bouquet of lilies, Zoe's favorite. The florist, a kind young man, wrapped them carefully and smiled. "Big celebration?" he asked. I nodded, though my heart wasn't in it. "My granddaughter's birthday," I replied. Saying it out loud should have brought joy, but instead, it sounded like a question I wasn't sure how to answer. When evening came, I drove to Calvin's house, the necklace tucked safely in my purse. The house was dressed up like a magazine, spread balloons, tied to the porch railings, fairy lights twinkling along the hedges. Neighbors milled about, carrying gifts, laughter spilling into the yard. From the outside, it looked perfect, but as I stepped through the door, I felt a chill. The smiles seemed painted on the warmth rehearsed. Calvin rushed forward, arms wide, hugging me tighter than he had in years. "Mom, you look amazing," he declared, his eyes sliding over to Monique, as if to confirm he had said the right words. She followed her lips, brushing my cheek in a perfunctory kiss, her perfume sharp and suffocating. "So glad you could make it, Bernadine," she said, her hand lingering on my arm in a grip that felt more like possession than affection. I smiled back, playing the role they expected, but inside, I felt like a lamb walking into a pen already prepared for slaughter. Everyone around me saw balloons, cake, and cheer. I saw a stage carefully set for a performance I hadn't agreed to. As the evening unfolded, I tried to shake off Zoe's whisper, but everywhere I turned, I found pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. The first breadcrumb appeared before I even crossed the threshold of the dining room. Standing near the coat rack was Patricia Green, my neighbor and oldest friend. Her face etched with concern. She pulled me aside, her voice low but urgent. "Bernadine, I don't want to start trouble tonight, but I need to tell you what I saw last week. Calvin and Monique have been in and out of the bank almost every day. I overheard them talking about getting the paperwork signed before it's too late." It didn't sound like regular business. I squeezed her hand, thanking her, though my stomach tightened into knots. I had known Patricia long enough to trust her instincts. Inside the house was buzzing with chatter, but beneath the surface, there was an edge to the atmosphere, like static before a storm. Calvin floated from guest to guest, laughing too loudly, clapping men on the back, but his eyes kept darting toward me, as if checking whether I was still under control. Monique, meanwhile, clung to my side with suffocating sweetness. She kept saying things like, "Bernadine, you look so youthful tonight, and you must be relieved not to handle all the little details anymore. Leave it all to us." Each word landed like a stone, heavy with hidden meaning. She didn't sound like a daughter-in-law. She sounded like a hunter circling her prey. When I tried to sit near Zoe, Monique intercepted, pulling me toward the head of the table. "You deserve the best seat," she purred, though I could feel her grip tightening around my elbow. Zoe's face fell, her eyes wide with helplessness. That small moment told me more than a dozen conversations could. Monique was deliberately cutting me off from the one person who might protect me. Later, as the birthday candles flickered, Calvin filled my glass with champagne and pressed it into my hand. "Come on, Ma, just one drink. Celebrate with us." I hesitated. I rarely drank, but his smile sharpened his voice, lowering just enough for me to hear the steel beneath. "Don't make it awkward. Everyone's watching." The words weren't a suggestion. They were an order wrapped in honey. Gaslighting at its finest, making me feel like the unreasonable one for resisting. I sipped the bubbles, burning down my throat, but I kept my eyes steady on him. The guests clapped as Zoe made a wish and blew out the candles. For a fleeting second, joy softened her face, but then I noticed Monique leaning into Calvin's ear, whispering. His nod was quick, his jaw tight. Something was happening tonight, and I was the centerpiece, whether I liked it or not. My mind replayed a memory from just a month earlier, Calvin standing in my kitchen, hands outstretched, demanding $20,000 to cover another failed business deal. When I hesitated, he slammed his fist on the counter. "You've never believed in me. Ma, if Dad were alive, he'd have given me the chance I gave in against my better judgment, because a mother's heart is both soft and foolish. He had left without a thank you, only a muttered, "You'll see, I'll make it right." Now, sitting in his home, watching him move, with the calculated air of a man staging a performance, I realized those words had not been a promise, but a threat. The final breadcrumb came when I excused myself to use the restroom. On the way, I passed Calvin's study door, slightly ajar. Inside on the desk, I glimpsed a stack of folders labeled with my name. I leaned closer, straining to read, but footsteps approached, and I quickly retreated. Still, I caught a word, bold across the top, of one-page conservatorship. My breath caught. Patricia's warning, Zoe's whisper, Monique's controlling sweetness, it all aligned into one dreadful picture. They weren't just planning to steal money. They were planning to steal my life, my autonomy, to reduce me to a signature on a paper and a body in a room they could control. As I returned to the table, my hands shook, but I forced a smile. Around me, the laughter roared louder, the clinking glasses echoed sharper. But inside, I knew the truth. Tonight wasn't a celebration. It was an ambush, dressed as a party. And I, Bernadine Lewis, was the prey they thought too old, too tired, too blind to fight back. As I sat at the table, forcing myself to smile at the shallow jokes and the off-key rendition of Happy Birthday, my mind drifted back unbidden to the long road that had led me here. The truth of betrayal is that it never starts in the moment. It grows like ivy, from years of sacrifice, overlooked kindness, taken for granted, and love twisted into obligation. I remembered the first apartment Calvin and I shared after my husband passed. He was barely 20, fresh out of college, convinced the world was his for the taking. I worked double shifts as a second-grade teacher, grading papers at midnight, waking before dawn to cook him breakfast, just so he could chase his dreams without worry. I paid his car insurance, his rent, his endless list of needs. When he failed his first startup, I reassured him. When he maxed out credit cards, I covered them. Each time he promised Ma, "I'll pay you back," and each time I believed him, because that is what mothers do. We believe even when the evidence says otherwise. I remembered pawning my wedding ring to cover his tuition when his scholarship fell through. I stood in the pawn shop under flickering fluorescent lights, the ring heavy in my palm, my heart breaking as I handed it over. That ring was the last gift from my husband, and I told myself it was temporary, that Calvin's future was worth more than gold. Yet when I gave him the check, he barely looked at me, muttering, "It's about time," before rushing off to class. Gratitude was a language he had long since forgotten. I remembered the night he called me at 2 a.m., voice slurred, begging me to bail him out after he was arrested for driving under the influence. I sat in the police station lobby, clutching my coat around me, ashamed, but still protective. When the officer handed me the paperwork, I saw judgment in his eyes. I wanted to scream, "He's not a bad man. He's just lost." But the words stuck in my throat. I signed the papers, paid the fee, and drove Calvin home in silence. He slept the whole way, while I stared at the road through tears. Monique entered our lives, soon after, dazzling and sharp. At first, I welcomed her grateful. My son had found someone who seemed strong where he was weak. But strength turned to control, and control turned to contempt. She saw me as an obstacle, not a mother-in-law. She made it clear with every icy smile, every backhanded compliment. When I offered to help around their house, she would say, "No offense, Bernadine, but we like things done properly." When I bought Zoe dresses or books, Monique would scoff. "That's not her style." as if I had no right to know my own granddaughter. The deepest cut came 3 years ago, when Calvin begged me to co-sign a loan for his can't-fail business venture. I hesitated, but Monique chimed in, her tone syrupy sweet. "Bernadine, you wouldn't want Calvin to feel like you don't believe in him, would you? You've always been the supportive mother." I signed against every instinct. Within a year, the business collapsed. The debt collectors called, and I nearly lost my house. Patricia helped me restructure, but the damage was done. Calvin never apologized, and Monique never mentioned it again. They simply moved on, as if my near ruin was a footnote in their grand story. And yet through it all, I still cooked Thanksgiving dinners, still sewed Zoe's Halloween costumes, still drove miles to babysit when they wanted weekends away. Because love, real love, does not keep score, or at least it shouldn't. But betrayal tallies every sacrifice, sharpens every slight, until one day it explodes in a single sentence, whispered by a trembling granddaughter. The clearest memory of all, though, was of my husband's last night. He lay in the hospital bed, skin pale, his once strong hands trembling as he squeezed mine. "Bernadine," he said, his voice ragged, "I know you love Calvin, but you must be careful. He doesn't see you as you are. He sees what you can give him. Don't let him take everything from you. Promise me." Tears had streamed down my cheeks as I whispered, "I promise." At the time, I thought he was being paranoid feverish. Now I knew better. His words had not been paranoia, they had been prophecy. Back at the party, I clutched my purse, where Zoe's necklace rested, and I realized something devastating. My entire life had been a slow drip of sacrifice. Each drop feeding the same child who now sought to drown me. And Monique, clever Monique, had only sharpened his hunger. My son was no longer the boy who had clung to me in thunderstorms, no longer the young man who had once whispered, "I love you, Ma," when he thought I was asleep. He was something colder now, something carved by debt and greed. The betrayal stung deeper because it was layered on top of love. If a stranger robs you, you call the police. If your son robs you, you call it heartbreak. But as I stared across the table at Calvin's rehearsed smile and Monique's predatory eyes, I knew heartbreak alone would not save me. This was not just a son losing his way. This was a deliberate plan to erase me. And if I wanted to honor my husband's last request, if I wanted Zoe to inherit more than ashes, I would have to fight back. After the cake had been cut and the guests began to scatter into corners of the living room, Zoe tugged at my hand again, her grip surprisingly strong for a 15-year-old. Her wide, brown eyes flicked toward her parents and then back at me, urgency written all over her face. "Grandma," she whispered, "come upstairs with me, please." I hesitated, but her desperation left me no choice. We slipped away quietly, climbing the carpeted staircase, while the noise of laughter and clinking glasses softened behind us. Inside her bedroom, Zoe closed the door and twisted the lock. She turned her face pale, her voice trembling. "I shouldn't even be telling you this, but I can't keep quiet. I heard them, Grandma. They were in the kitchen last night, talking when they thought I was asleep. They said, tonight after the party, they're going to sit you down and make you sign something called conservatorship." She stumbled over the word, but I felt its weight slam into me like a physical blow. Conservatorship, a word I had read about in articles, usually attached to elderly people, stripped of their independence, left at the mercy of those who claimed to care for them. My knees buckled, and I sat down heavily on the edge of her bed. Zoe knelt in front of me, gripping my hands. They said, "It's already arranged, Grandma. A lawyer is coming. They'll make it sound like it's to protect you. But really, it's so they can control your house, your savings, everything. They even joked that by the time you realize what's happening, it'll be too late." Her voice broke, tears pooling in her eyes. "I don't want to lose you, Grandma. I don't want them to take you away." My chest constricted as if the air had been sucked from the room. In that instant, every suspicion, every breadcrumb solidified into a brutal truth. Calvin and Monique weren't just plotting. They were ready. Tonight, they would smile, they would toast, they would frame it as love and concern, and then they would chain me with the law, reduce me to a dependent, strip me of everything my life had built. I wanted to weep, to ask how my own son could betray me like this. But Zoe's tear-streaked face held me steady. She had risked her parents' wrath to warn me. She had chosen me. That thought pierced through the fog of despair and lit a spark deep inside. "Zoe," I whispered, pulling her into my arms. "Thank you for telling me. You are braver than you know." I kissed her hair, inhaling the scent of birthday cake and shampoo, and vowed silently that she would not bear this burden alone. For a moment, I let myself grieve. Grieve the boy I had raised, who was now gone, replaced by a man who saw his mother not as a human being, but as an obstacle. Grieve the daughter-in-law who had sharpened his flaws into weapons. But grief quickly hardened into resolve. I leaned back, cupping Zoe's face. "Listen carefully, sweetheart. They may think I'm weak, that I'll just sign whatever they put in front of me. But they've forgotten who I am. I am your grandmother. I am your grandfather's widow, and I will not be erased. Do you understand?" Her tears slowed, and she nodded determination, flickering through her fear. "What are you going to do, Grandma?" she asked. I forced a small smile, though my hands still shook. "I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago. I'm going to fight back, but we must be smart. Not loud, not angry, smart." Outside the bedroom door, the laughter grew louder, Calvin's voice rising above the others. I could almost picture his face, smug, with the confidence of a man who believed the game was already won. But he had underestimated me. He had underestimated the love between a grandmother and her granddaughter, the kind of bond that cannot be manipulated or signed away. Zoe had given me the truth, and with truth comes power. And as I sat there, clutching her hands, I swore tonight would not be the night they took my fortune. Tonight would be the night I began to take back control. I left Zoe's room with my face composed, the kind of calm mask I had learned to wear during the hardest years of my life. But inside a storm raged. Every instinct told me to march downstairs, slam my fist on the table, and shout the truth for everyone to hear. Yet I knew better. Anger is loud. Anger is reckless. And anger is exactly what Calvin and Monique expected. They had built their trap with the law itself, and the only way to beat them was to turn that same law into my shield and their noose. When the party ended and the guests trickled out into the night, I hugged Zoe tight, whispered for her to act normal, and excused myself early. "I'm not feeling well," I said, feigning fatigue. Calvin's eyes narrowed, but he let me go, probably assuming it would make me more pliable when they came for me later. The moment I stepped through my own front door, I locked it, sat at the kitchen table, and dialed Patricia. She answered on the second ring, her voice a mixture of concern and sharp readiness. "I knew something was wrong tonight," she said, before I could even speak. "Tell me everything." I poured it all out. Zoe's whisper, the folders labeled with my name, the word conservatorship glaring up from Calvin's desk. Patricia was silent for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. They're planning to declare you incapable of managing your own affairs. It's not just theft, Bernadine. It's erasure. Once you sign, or once they convince a judge, you'll lose control of your home, your finances, maybe even your medical choices. They could put you in a facility tomorrow, and you'd have no legal recourse. My chest tightened, but Patricia's tone hardened. But we can stop them. We'll use their arrogance against them. That night, our plan began to take shape. Patricia, though retired, still had connections. She called in favors from a notary. She trusted someone who had spent decades ensuring signatures were legitimate. She also reached out to a young police officer she had mentored years ago, asking him to be on standby in case intimidation turned into coercion. Better safe than sorry, she murmured. Meanwhile, I gathered my own arsenal. I retrieved the strongbox from my closet, where I had kept every important document since my husband died. Out came the deed to my house, the insurance policies, the savings account statements, and most importantly, the will my husband and I had drawn up years ago. It wasn't perfect. It left everything to Calvin under the assumption he would provide for Zoe, but it was still evidence of my mental competence at the time it was signed. Patricia examined each paper carefully, nodding. This will help. We'll also draft a new will tonight, naming Zoe as your beneficiary. I'll oversee it myself. My hands trembled as I signed, but not with fear, with clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to Calvin's demands. I was acting on my own. Patricia then showed me how to set up a recording app on my phone. Keep it on you, she instructed. If they try to manipulate you, we'll have proof. She also advised me to act as if nothing had changed. They'll come for you tomorrow or the day after. Pretend to be compliant. Let them think you're tired, confused, ready to hand over control. And then, when they present the papers, we strike. The hardest part was involving Zoe. I didn't want her burdened, but Patricia reminded me that child has already carried more truth than most adults. Give her a role, it will keep her strong. So Zoe became our silent witness, instructed to watch, listen, and record if she could. Over the next 24 hours, I rehearsed my part, like an actress preparing for the performance of her life. I practiced letting my shoulders slump, my voice falter, my hand tremble, as if I didn't understand what was happening. Calvin had always underestimated me, seeing only weakness in my age. This time, I would let him believe it, until the very moment the trap snapped shut. When Calvin called the next evening, his tone was sugary again. Ma Monique and I want to come over tonight, just to talk about your future. We've even got a professional coming to explain things clearly so you won't be overwhelmed. It's all out of love. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. That sounds fine, Calvin. I'll put on some tea. After I hung up, Patricia arrived, notepad in hand, eyes sharp behind her glasses. She brought the notary with her, a stooped man with kind eyes, who introduced himself simply as Mr. Harris. Don't worry, he said softly. I've seen people try this trick before. It never ends well for them when the truth is on your side. By dusk, everything was in place. Zoe pretended to do homework at the dining table. Patricia sat in the living room knitting, and Mr. Harris remained out of sight in the kitchen. I stood at the door, heart pounding, as Calvin and Monique arrived, a slick-looking man in a suit trailing behind them. Ma, Calvin said, kissing my cheek as if we hadn't drifted into enemy territory. This is Mr. Lowell. He's going to help us make sure you're taken care of. Monique's smile glittered like broken glass. Yes, Bernadine, we just want to protect you. Life gets confusing at your age. Wouldn't it be nice to let us handle the hard stuff? I forced a shaky laugh, letting my hand tremble as I poured tea. Maybe you're right, I murmured. I do get tired these days. Calvin's eyes lit up greedy and triumphant. He had no idea that every word, every gesture was being documented. As they laid out the papers on the table, my heart beat like a drum. Conservatorship, power of attorney, contracts that would reduce me from a woman to a ward. Calvin pushed the pen toward me, his voice syrupy with false love. All you have to do is sign Ma. Then you'll never have to worry again. We'll take care of everything. I let my hand hover fingers, trembling, eyes downcast. I felt the weight of Zoe's gaze, the steady presence of Patricia in the next room, the reassuring silence of Mr. Harris waiting. This was the moment. This was the stage they had built for my downfall, but it would become the platform for their undoing. As I touched the pen, I whispered to myself the words my husband had left me. The law can be a weapon or a shield. Tonight, it would be both. The pen trembled in my hand, as if I were on the brink of surrender, but deep inside, I was as sharp as I had ever been. Calvin leaned closer, his hand resting on the table, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "That's it, Ma," he murmured, his voice low and coaxing. "Just sign here, and we'll take care of everything. No more stress, no more bills, no more decisions weighing you down." His words dripped with false tenderness, but underneath, I heard the command of a man desperate to seize control. Monique placed her manicured fingers lightly on my shoulder, squeezing gently, her smile stretched wide. "We love you, Bernadine," she cooed. "This is for your own good. We've been so worried about you running that old house all by yourself. You deserve peace." Her grip tightened, the sweetness fading for just a second, revealing the steel beneath. "You do trust us, don't you?" For a moment, I let my shoulders sag, my breath hitch the picture of a tired old woman overwhelmed by the world. I picked up the pen, my hand shaking, and moved it toward the line. Calvin's breath caught audibly. Monique's eyes sparkled with greedy satisfaction. And just when they thought they had won, I stopped. My hand froze in midair. I lifted my head slowly, meeting Calvin's eyes first, then Monique's. The trembling in my hand ceased, replaced by a steady, unflinching grip. My voice, once wavering, rang clear across the room. "Do you think I'm blind? Do you think I don't know what this is?" Calvin blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish caught in shallow water. "Ma, it's not what you think." "Oh, it's exactly what I think," it cut, in my voice like ice. "This isn't love. This isn't care. This is theft. Dressed up in paper and ink, but theft all the same." Monique's smile faltered, the mask slipping. "You're confused, Bernadine. These are just legal protections. We don't want you to be taken advantage of." I pushed the papers back across the table, my eyes never leaving hers. The only people trying to take advantage of me are sitting right in front of me. From the kitchen, a firm voice spoke up. Mr. Harris, the notary. Patricia had called, stepped into the room. "I've witnessed plenty of signings in my career, but I've rarely seen such blatant coercion." He set his briefcase on the counter, his gaze unwavering. "I'll be noting this incident very carefully." Calvin shot to his feet, his face reddening. "Who the hell are you?" Patricia entered next, calm as stone knitting, still in her lap. "He's the legitimate notary, unlike the one you hired," she said smoothly. "And I'm here as a witness. Bernadine is fully competent, and she knows exactly what you're trying to do." Monique's composure cracked. "This is outrageous. You can't just ambush us in our own home." Patricia arched an eyebrow. "Ambush. That's rich coming from two people who plotted to strip a woman of her rights. under the guise of family duty. You should know better, Monique. The law cuts both ways. Zoe, who had been quietly sitting at the dining table, with her school books open, raised her phone. I recorded everything she said, her voice small but steady. Every word you said tonight. I'm going to give it to the police if you keep lying. The room went still. Calvin's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. For a terrifying second, I thought he might strike the table, or worse, lash out at Zoe. But the presence of Patricia Mr. Harris and the knowledge of a recording stopped him cold. I stood, gathering every ounce of strength in my body, and leaned across the table. You thought I was weak, I said, my voice low but firm. You thought you could gaslight me, trick me, bully me into surrendering the life I built with my own hands. But you forgot something. I survived poverty. I survived grief. I survived raising you, Calvin, when your father died, and the world seemed impossible. And I will survive you too. Calvin's lips twisted, fury etched across his face. You owe me, he hissed. Everything I am, everything I have, is because of you. And you still won't give me what's mine. Nothing here is yours, I shot back. Not this house, not my savings, not my dignity. And you will never get them. Not now, not ever. Monique's voice broke through, shrill and panicked. We were only trying to help. If people knew how forgetful you've become, how unstable, they'd understand why we had to step in. Patricia's laugh was cold, forgetful, unstable. She just signed a new will this morning, under my supervision, witnessed and notarized. A woman deemed incompetent cannot draft a valid will. Your little narrative falls apart with a single stroke of the pen. The color drained from Monique's face. Calvin's chest heaved with rage, his entire body trembling. He looked at me as though I had betrayed him, but all I saw in his eyes was the reflection of the betrayal he had already committed against me. I straightened my back, my voice rising above the silence. This ends tonight. You will not trick me. You will not control me. And if you try again, I will make sure every shred of evidence goes directly to the authorities. Evidence never blinks, Calvin. Remember that. For a long, taut moment, no one moved. Then Calvin swept the papers off the table, scattering them across the floor, and stormed toward the door. Monique followed her heels, clattering on the hard wood, her voice a bitter hiss. You'll regret this, Bernadine. Don't think you've won. I watched them go, my heart pounding, but unbroken. For the first time in years, I felt the fire of my own strength rising. They had thought me weak, a pawn to be manipulated. But tonight proved otherwise. Tonight, I reminded them who I truly was. The morning after the confrontation, I woke with the weight of decision pressing against my chest, but not the heaviness of despair. No, this was the solemn gravity of resolve. The sun filtered through my curtains, golden light streaking across the wooden floor, and for the first time in years, I felt the future wasn't a battlefield I had to cross alone. It was a ground I could finally claim as my own. Patricia arrived just after breakfast, crisp and composed, as always, carrying a leather folder beneath her arm. Zoe sat at the kitchen table, her chin propped on her hand, still wide-eyed from the night before, but steadier now, buoyed by the knowledge that truth had been spoken aloud. Bernadine, Patricia began setting the folder down. We need to move quickly. Calvin and Monique will not slink away quietly. They'll try again, maybe in court, maybe with rumors, maybe both. But we can cut them off at the knees legally starting today. She opened the folder, revealing documents neatly arranged my freshly notarized will, naming Zoe as sole beneficiary. A revocation of any powers of attorney Calvin had ever touched, a motion for a restraining order in case intimidation escalated. Each paper was a shield forged from ink and law. My hand trembled slightly as I signed them, not from fear, but from the weight of finality. "This is it, then," I whispered, the line in the sand. "That's right," Patricia said firmly. "You're protecting yourself and ensuring Zoe inherits what you worked for. Calvin may rage, Monique may scheme, but the law is on your side now. And evidence." She tapped Zoe's phone, where the recording was stored, never blinks. That afternoon, we drove to the courthouse. The air was cool and crisp, the kind of October day that carried both the bite of approaching winter and the clarity of falling leaves. Inside, the courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, a blend of history and sterility. My shoes clicked against the marble floor, echoing as though each step announced, "I am not invisible. I am not weak." At the clerk's window, Patricia filed the documents with efficient precision. I watched the clerk stamp each page, the sound sharp and final, like a gavel striking wood. My new will was recorded. My protections were in place, and my request for a restraining order was logged pending review. 2 days later, justice began to ripple outward. Calvin and Monique stormed into my home, demanding explanations, their voices dripping with outrage. But this time, I was ready. I met them on the porch, Patricia beside me, Zoe standing just behind. "You can't just cut us out," Calvin shouted, his face red. "After everything I've done for you." I raised a hand, silencing him. "Everything you've done to me, Calvin, not for me. You tried to steal my life, my freedom, my home. You nearly succeeded. But it's over. The will is rewritten. The powers of attorney are revoked. You hold nothing now." Monique's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp as glass. "You'll regret this, Bernadine. You'll die alone, penniless, and no one will care." Patricia stepped forward, her calm voice carrying more weight than their rage ever could. "Careful, Monique. Threats are not wise, especially when evidence of your coercion is already on file. You should be thinking less about Bernadine's supposed downfall and more about your own legal exposure. Fraud, undue influence, elder abuse. Do you really want to test how a judge will see you?" For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear cross Monique's face. Calvin tugged at her arm, muttering something under his breath, and together they stalked off down the driveway, their anger trailing behind them like smoke. But justice didn't end with their retreat. A week later, we stood in a small courtroom, wood-paneled walls, closing in as a judge reviewed the restraining order. Calvin sat with his lawyer, looking small and furious. Monique's lips pressed into a thin line, her nails tapping against the table. The judge listened to Patricia's calm testimony, reviewed Mr. Harris's notarized notes, and finally, Zoe's recording. The words filled the courtroom, Calvin's voice dripping with greed, Monique's with icy manipulation. "She's too old to fight us. She'll just sign." Calvin's voice echoed. The silence afterward was deafening. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was steady, resolute. "It is clear to this court that Bernadine Lewis is of sound mind and was subjected to attempted coercion by her own family. The restraining order is granted. Calvin Lewis and Monique Lewis are prohibited from contacting or approaching her outside lawful proceedings. Furthermore, this court strongly recommends the district attorney review the evidence for potential charges of elder abuse and fraud." Calvin's face crumpled, disbelief washing over him. Monique squeezed his arm, but her hand shook. I sat straighter in my chair, the weight on my chest finally lifting. Justice wasn't just a word anymore. It was real. It was stamped, signed, and sealed by the law itself. When the hearing ended, Zoe hugged me so tightly, I thought my ribs might crack. "You did it, Grandma," she whispered. "No," I corrected gently, kissing the top of her head. "We did it. You, me, Patricia, and the truth. They tried to erase me, but we erased their lies instead." As we stepped out into the cool afternoon air, I knew the fight wasn't entirely over. There would be rumors, bitterness, attempts to claw back power. But the foundation was set. Legally, emotionally, spiritually, I had won. And nothing they could say or do would ever change that. The house felt different after the court ruling, quieter, lighter, though still carrying echoes of pain. For days, I would catch myself listening for Calvin's car in the driveway or Monique's sharp knock at the door. But neither came. The restraining order was more than just a piece of paper. It was a shield, a line they dared not cross. I spent the first week disentangling my life from theirs completely. Every account Calvin had ever touched, I closed or rewrote. The joint credit card he had once helped me open, canceled. The utility bills he insisted on routing through his address, redirected. Even the small savings account, where he'd convinced me to deposit emergency funds for Zoe. I pulled every cent and transferred it to an account in my sole name, with Patricia's guidance. It was tedious, exhausting work, but each signature, each phone call, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. By the end of it, I realized I was freer than I had been in years. Of course, Calvin didn't take it quietly. Word spread quickly through the family grapevine. Cousins called their voices tight with accusation. "Bernadine, why are you freezing out your only son? He just wants to help." Others muttered darker things, that I was selfish, ungrateful, senile. I could hear Monique's fingerprints all over their words. The hardest blow came from my sister Evelyn. Over the phone, her voice shook with disapproval. "He's your son, Bernie. Blood is blood. You can't just cut him off like this." I listened, tears burning in my eyes, before answering softly. "Evelyn Blood doesn't give him the right to destroy me. Family isn't just about being born into it. It's about who stands beside you when it matters." And when it mattered, Calvin tried to bury me alive in paper and ink. She went quiet. For once, she had no retort. Isolation came swift and sharp. Invitations to family dinners dried up. Messages from relatives dwindled. When I did see them at church, they avoided my gaze, whispering behind cupped hands. But I held my head high. I had chosen truth, and truth often comes with a price. Zoe became my anchor in those days. She visited after school, bringing her homework and her laughter. She filled my kitchen with chatter, telling me about her classes, her dreams of becoming a lawyer. Like Patricia, "I want to protect people the way she protected you," she said one evening, her eyes shining. I hugged her. Then, a fierce swell of pride filling me. If all my sacrifices had led to this moment, to giving her a model of courage and resilience, then they were worth it. Patricia, too, refused to let me drift into solitude. She stopped by with groceries, checked in with phone calls, reminded me that justice wasn't just about the courtroom, but about living freely afterward. "You've taken your power back," she said one afternoon over tea. "Don't give it away again. Not to their whispers, not to your doubts." In the stillness of my home, I began to rediscover myself. I dug out old photo albums, remembering the woman I had been long before Calvin and Monique's schemes. I planted roses in the front yard, something I had always wanted to do, but never had the energy for. Each bloom felt like defiance, a splash of life against the shadow they had tried to cast. And slowly, peace seeped back into my bones. Not the naive peace of ignoring trouble, but the hard-won peace of a woman who has faced betrayal, fought back, and lived to tell the tale. I no longer waited for the sound of Calvin's car. Instead, I listened for Zoe's footsteps on the porch, Patricia's knock on the door, in the steady rhythm of my own heart, reminding me I survived. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, like the first soft breeze of spring after a bitter winter. For weeks after the confrontation, I carried the ache of betrayal in my chest, like a bruise that refused to fade. Nights were the hardest, lying awake, replaying Calvin's words, his face twisted with anger, Monique's sharp voice promising I'd regret defying them. Some part of me still mourned, not for the people they were, but for the son and daughter-in-law I had once hoped they could be. But healing has a way of blooming in unexpected places. Zoe became my light. She'd sit cross-legged on my couch, telling me about school, about her plans for college. One evening, she handed me a paper she had written for a civics class. The title read, "Justice for the Vulnerable, How the Law Protects Those Who Refuse to Be Silenced." She had written about me. I cried, then, not from sorrow, but from the fierce joy of knowing my fight had given her courage. At Patricia's urging, I joined a support group at the community center. Mostly women, some widowed, some divorced, some simply carrying the weight of children who had turned cruel. We shared stories that made the walls hum with pain, but also with resilience. I listened, I spoke, I laughed for the first time in months. In their faces, I saw reflections of my own survival. Therapy followed, gentle but firm. My counselor taught me that healing wasn't about erasing what happened, but about reclaiming the narrative. "You are not just the woman who was almost tricked out of her freedom," she said. "You are the woman who stood up, who fought back, who protected her legacy and her granddaughter." For the first time, I began to believe it. I rebuilt slowly, piece by piece. I cooked meals, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to taste the flavors of my youth again. I played old jazz records, letting the music curl through my home like incense. I even began painting again, small canvases of roses from my garden, each brushstroke a reminder that beauty could grow from broken soil. And in the circle of my chosen family, Zoe, Patricia, the women at the support group, I felt something stronger than the ache of betrayal. I felt belonging. Blood had turned against me, but love had not. Love, I realized, is not measured by last names or shared houses. Love is measured by who shows up, who stands guard when the storm hits. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. Calvin and Monique thought they could control the story. Once the courts shut them down, they whispered to cousins, called old neighbors, spun a tale where I was the villain, an ungrateful mother poisoned against her own flesh and blood. But gossip, like smoke, has a way of revealing its own fire. At first, I felt the sting of their campaign. A cousin avoided me in the grocery store, eyes downcast, as if I were contagious. At church, I noticed pews shifting subtly, people choosing not to sit near me. I overheard the hiss of words, senile, bitter, crazy, old woman. Monique's fingerprints were all over it. But then the truth began to seep out. Zoe's recording circulated quietly. shared first with the pastor, then with a few trusted community members. Whispers turned. Those who had once doubted began to see the picture clearly. Calvin's greedy voice, Monique's calculated manipulation, their plan to strip me of my autonomy. And suddenly, the shame wasn't mine anymore. The pastor addressed the congregation one Sunday, his voice calm but firm. Without naming names, he spoke of honoring elders, of protecting those who had sacrificed for us, of resisting the temptation to trade loyalty for greed. His words weren't just scripture, they were a mirror, and everyone knew who it reflected. When the service ended, people came to me. Some hugged me. Some whispered apologies. Others simply pressed my hand, eyes full of quiet respect. Calvin and Monique's social standing crumbled. Friends they had boasted to at country clubs stopped returning their calls. The women Monique once entertained at her luncheons politely declined invitations. Their names, once spoken with admiration, became cautionary tales. At family gatherings, I chose not to attend. I heard. They sat alone, conversation halting whenever they tried to insert themselves. Even Calvin's work suffered. He had hoped his community ties would shield him, but when whispers of elder abuse reached his employer, promotions dried up. His colleagues kept their distance. People don't trust a man who would rob his own mother. Monique fared no better. Her social media posts, once filled with carefully staged photos of designer handbags and catered dinners, drew scornful comments. "All that money isn't yours," someone wrote. "Stolen shine never lasts." Eventually, she stopped posting altogether. The irony was sharp. They had tried to isolate me, to paint me as unstable and alone. Instead, they became the outcasts shunned not by law alone, but by the very community they sought to impress. And me, I no longer walked through the grocery store with eyes downcast. Strangers nodded. Neighbors greeted me warmly. Respect had returned, not because I demanded it, but because I had held my ground. Calvin and Monique had gambled everything on greed, and in losing, they had lost far more than they ever imagined. As I sit now, in my quiet living room, roses blooming outside the window, Zoe's laughter drifting down the hallway, I realize that what Calvin and Monique tried to steal was never just money. It was dignity, legacy, and the right to decide my own future. They failed. Justice came not only through the gavel in a courtroom, but through the strength of truth, the resilience of love, and the courage to stand, even when standing meant standing alone. They thought they could erase me with papers and lies. Instead, I reclaimed my name, my freedom, and my story. The scars of betrayal remain. I won't pretend they don't, but they remind me of what I survived. I am not just Bernadine Lewis, the woman her son tried to silence. I am Bernadine Lewis, the grandmother who fought back the survivor, who refused to bow the matriarch, who left a legacy not of wealth alone, but of strength, integrity, and love. To anyone listening who has faced betrayal, who has been gaslighted or underestimated, your voice matters. Evidence never blinks. The truth, though sometimes buried, has a way of breaking free. Now, I want to ask you, have you ever faced betrayal from someone you thought you could trust? How did you find the strength to push back? Share your story in the comments, because your truth could be the light someone else needs tonight. And if you found strength in mine, don't forget to subscribe, like, and join me here. We're not just telling stories, we're reclaiming voices.